Hello and welcome back to our study of Hebrews. So last week we started laying some groundwork for understanding the letter. This week we're going to look at the way that the Hebrew writer himself introduces his work. So our text today is going to be the first 4 verses of Hebrews chapter 1. Let's turn there together. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God, and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. All right, so this is a short text, but our Hebrew writer packs a ton into it. He is very concise. And in fact, that's something that we're going to notice throughout the letter. The Hebrew writer is excellent at his economy of language. He has great skill as an orator, which is one of the things that leads me to believe that this is probably originally meant as an oration. This part of the letter is the Hebrew writer. Well, you see, even I fall into this, like we talked about last week. Hebrews is not a letter. Even I fall into using that language sometimes. This is the part of Hebrews that in classical oratory we would call the exordium. This is the part of an oration that declares the themes and the purposes of a speech. It's more or less what we would call the introduction in English. The Hebrew writer has declared to us several themes, all in a very short space, and we're going to spend much of our time this week looking at those themes, listing them out, because that's what we're going to be pursuing in greater detail as we study through the book of Hebrews. The exordium is also the place where an ancient orator would establish his ethical appeal, that is, his personal appeal, his character appeal, his authority for speaking on a subject. And so the exordium would include material, not necessarily an explicit statement, but material that would broadcast to the audience, in essence, this is why you should listen to me. This is why I'm trustworthy on this topic. Here, the Hebrew writer does something that's really interesting. To advance his primary theme, the Hebrew writer does not focus on his own personal appeal as a speaker, but on the character and the authority of the Son of God as someone through whom God has spoken. So instead of giving us this is why you should listen to me, the Hebrew writer is giving us, here's why you should listen to the Son of God. Because this is going to be his primary argument, especially here at the beginning of the letter. So we'll consider the way that he establishes that in his exordium as well. So Hebrews famously begins, long ago, in many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. This is the Hebrew writer's first statement affirming the imperfection of the old revelation and the old order of things under Moses, which will, of course, be a dominant theme in Hebrews. All right, now, in modern English, the word imperfect carries with it the sense of containing errors or containing mistakes. That's not what we mean here. That's not the argument that the Hebrew writer is making. By imperfect, we just mean not complete or ongoing. The revelation of God to Israel was incomplete. That's a characterization given by the law itself. And this is why the Hebrew writer is describing things in this way. That God spoke in many times and in many ways. That is, God's revelation during the former age was piecemeal, right, given in many times. It was given through many different means as well. It was given through visions, through direct speech, through signs, through the Urim and Thummim, all kinds of different things that we see in the Old Testament, ways that God communicates with lots of different people across a huge span of time. We saw, in fact, whenever we were studying the law of Moses, we saw the piecemeal nature of the revelation it's in the law itself. All right, go to Exodus chapter 6, verses 2 through 4, and God is going to tell Moses something about his name. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them, to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. So God didn't even reveal his name to all men. Right? He didn't reveal himself at all to all men, but first off to the patriarchs, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he established his covenant with them, but he did not reveal its fullness to them, nor did they receive its promises. He didn't fully reveal himself even to the patriarchs. And he tells Moses, by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. So even that revelation, the revelation of God's name, it takes generations to accomplish. Generations between Abraham and Moses. And the whole revelation that God makes through Moses is itself not complete, not finished, because Moses foretells that God is going to raise up another prophet after him. So the old order was given in many portions. It was revealed in pieces over the course of centuries, to shepherds, to priests, to kings, to exiles. That revelation under the old order is all over the place. And so that brings us to another aspect of the Hebrew writer's description of the old revelation. God's revelation was given to the prophets, plural. The law identifies Abraham as a prophet. God later appoints Moses as a prophet. As we've just said, Moses anticipates the rise of yet another prophet after him. The old order relied on the never complete work of many men over the course of Israel's history, over the course of centuries. Now, in total, this is going to be a major theme of the Hebrew writer. That the old order was constantly in process. It was never complete. It was never done, right? We're going to see that especially with the work of the priests and the work, most of all, of the high priest, how it just constantly has to be done over and over again. It's never brought to completion. And that work is too reliant on sinful men. And that it's constantly looking forward to fulfillment and to something other than itself. And so the Hebrew writer, and this is just right out of the gate, God in many times and in many ways spoke to us by the prophets. The Hebrew writer contrasts that over and against the new age ushered in by the Son of God. He says, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. It's a very simple statement, because the Hebrew writer is stressing the simplicity and the finality of what the Son has done. And I need to hold myself back a little bit, because the Hebrew writer has not named the Son yet. And in fact, he's not going to name the Son in this introduction. There's a reason for that we'll get to. But he's stressing the simplicity and the finality of what the Son of God has done. So rather than being delivered across many times, this revelation has been delivered in a brief period of time in these last days, the Hebrew writer says. And rather than delivering this revelation in many ways, God delivers it through being spoken. And rather than delivering the revelation piecemeal through many men, God delivers it through one man, his Son. And this man, like we've said, is not just a prophet. Rather than being a prophet, he is none other than the Son of God. So in one really short sentence, the Hebrew writer is already laying the groundwork for contrasting the old order with the new order ushered in by the Son of God. And he's establishing the superiority of the new order. And again, notice, he's not named Jesus yet. And there's a reason for that we're going to get to. So we're going to keep referring to him as the Son of God, as the Hebrew writer is referring to him. For now, though, I want us to turn our attention back to this phrase that the Hebrew writer used, these last days. Now, that denotes a couple of things. First off, it denotes the quickness of the revelation. But besides that, this phrase, these last days, also signifies that the revelation through the Son has ushered in something new entirely. It's the language that the law and the prophets use of the Messianic age. If you look in, you can find this in several places, but look in Daniel chapter 10, verses 12 through 14. Then he said to me, this is the man in linen speaking to Daniel, then he said to me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision is for days yet to come. The vision is concerning the latter days. All right, what is to happen to your people in the latter days, that is, the last days. This is a vision, and we've studied Daniel 10 through 12 before. This vision is a messianic vision. It is something that is supposed to carry Israel into the messianic age. And in fact, I think there's a fairly good case, like we made in our Daniel study however long ago. I think there's a fairly good case that Daniel is actually speaking to the pre-incarnate Son of God himself. He is speaking to the Messiah before he has taken on flesh. The revelation in the Messiah, the revelation that comes through the Son of God, divides these former days of anticipation from these last days, the Messianic age. It is a declaration that the wait for the Messiah is over. The Messianic age has come, and it was brought about by God speaking through his Son. So the total picture that the Hebrew writer sets in front of us is that God's Son has revealed the will of God to us in a final and a complete way. So since the superiority and the necessity of Christ are the center of the Hebrew writer's message, he finishes his introduction with a salvo about the superiority of the Son of God. Lots of different ways in which the Son of God is superior and necessary. He ascribes 7 or 8 different qualities to the Son of God that demonstrate the Son's superior status and his exalted greatness. All right, the first quality is that God appointed him to be the heir of all things. All right, and this is why the Hebrew writer has not named Jesus yet. Because he wants to focus on Jesus' status as God's Son. All right, now, obviously, as we're reading through this part of the letter, we know that by referring to the Son of God, the Hebrew writer is referring to Jesus. His original audience knew that too, that he means Jesus. But he calls him the Son to draw attention to his status as heir of all things. Because remember, from the law of Moses, what an important and elevated status the heir has. The heir is the most important member of the household after the patriarch himself. And much of the law is structured around protecting the heir's inheritance and securing the position of the heir. Now, we studied that along several points in our Law of Moses study. That inheritance is super important, not just on the spiritual level, but in antiquity at the physical level as well. Now, when you take it to that spiritual level, though, in terms of God's promise, the status of heir is of even greater importance, and it's even more exclusive. All right, you look at places like Genesis 21:10, where Sarah refuses to allow Ishmael to inherit alongside Isaac. Ultimately, that's a spiritual matter. Right, now Sarah, I think, meant it physically, right? That Isaac, Abraham's a very wealthy man, and Sarah means for Isaac to get all of that wealth. But God steps in and agrees with Sarah, and not just on account of Abraham's physical possessions, but because of the most important possession that Abraham has, namely God's promise. He says that through Isaac shall your offspring be named. It's through Isaac that the promise is going to be carried forward. There can only be one heir as far as the promises of God are concerned, at least in that part of history. So we learn from that spiritually about the Son of God's preeminent position in the cosmic order. He is heir of all things. He is God's heir. Right? If Abraham's heir is that important, how important is God's own heir? The heir who inherits all things. Of course, the Hebrew writer is going to elaborate on this pretty much immediately in his first exhortation in chapters 1 and 2. So we'll leave that there for now. The second quality that we learn about the Son of God is that God created the world through this appointed heir. That the Son of God was instrumental in creating the entire universe, and as creator, the Son has authority over the creation, again, pointing to his exalted status. Right, the third quality is that the Son is the brightness of God's glory. The glory of God is absolutely essential to God. Right? It's something that we never see the Lord separate from his glory in the scriptures. We see the way that God's glory shines in the way that it's described in the law. Right? His glory was in the pillar of cloud and fire. His glory rested on the mountain when Moses went up. We remember that the brightness of that glory was so intense that Moses had to veil his face when he went down into the camp of Israel. They couldn't stand to look at Moses. And that bright glory, that same brightness, came to rest on the tabernacle, and later came to rest on the temple whenever Solomon built it. The Hebrew writer tells us that that brightness, that glory, is none other than the Son of God. That is, whenever Moses had to veil his face, it was because the Son of God was too intense for the congregation of Israel. He is the brightness of the glory of God. The fourth quality of the Son is that he is the exact imprint of God's nature. The King James renders it the express image of his person. All right, he's a... Well, we have to be really careful here. In fact, I'm going to avoid making any kind of metaphors at all about this relationship between the Son and the Father, because this is speaking of the union of the Father and the Son. And so I'll merely just state what we confess about the Son, that the Son of God is of one essence with God the Father. Jesus affirms that throughout the Gospel of John. Remember, perhaps Jesus has a ton of scandalous claims in the Gospel of John. One of his most scandalous ones is what we read in John 14, verse 9. Whenever Jesus says that he who has seen me has seen the Father. Right, that's the kind of thing that the Hebrew writer means whenever he says that the Son is the exact imprint of his person. And so, of course, the Son of God is naturally exalted above everybody and everything else, including Moses, including the entire old order of things. The fifth quality of this is that the Son upholds all things by the word of his power. And one of the reasons that the Hebrew writer begins with God's speech, that he begins by saying, in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, is because God's speech has power. Right, that's the very first thing that we learn in Genesis chapter 1. God's word has creative power. God doesn't just talk for no reason. When God talks, things happen. Now, that creative power extends beyond the initial acts of creation in the first chapters of Genesis. The psalmists celebrate the power of God's voice as it sustains creation. Right? One of the praise psalms that we focused on in our recent series on the Psalms was Psalm 29. And Psalm 29 is focused almost exclusively on the sustaining power of God's voice, how God upholds the created order through the word of his power. Let's return to Psalm 29. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth, and strips the forests bare, and all in his temple cry, Glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as King forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. Right, so the psalmists speak of this, that the Lord sustains the creation through the word of his power. Isaiah does the same thing in Isaiah 55:10 and 11. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. When God speaks, things happen. And so the Hebrew writer tells us that just as the Son was instrumental in creating everything, so is he instrumental in sustaining everything. That voice that the psalmist is speaking of, the voice that the Lord is speaking of through Isaiah, that is the voice of the Son of God, that goes out and does not return empty, that causes the deer to give birth. And that happens because the Son is of one essence with the Father. Right, now, the sixth quality of the Son is that after making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. This is the biggie that the Hebrew writer is going to spend the bulk of his time on in the book. He's going to show the superiority and the finality of the Son's work in this way, that he was able to accomplish what the old order could never accomplish, purification for sins. And that after he made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Father, meaning his work is done. And the Hebrew writer is going to make much of both of these things, so we'll leave that there. Finally, though, the Son has become better than angels and inherited a name superior to them. That is the seventh quality that the Hebrew writer ascribes to the Son. And here the Hebrew writer begins to argue explicitly about the superiority of the Son. He begins his explicit contrast, and up to this point all the contrast has been implicit. Right. Everything that we've been saying, we've been able to deduce from what the Hebrew writer has said and what we know from scriptures. this is the first that he's coming just right out and saying the Son is better. Right? The Son is better than the angels because he inherited a name that is superior to theirs. Now, this is an argument that he is going to develop just right off the bat in Hebrews chapters 1 and 2 in his first exhortation. So we'll leave that one there for now and pick it up next week. Before we close today, though, I want us to notice that the Hebrew writer has also described the three roles of Christ. Because God has spoken through his Son, the Son is a prophet. Because the Son of God has made purification for sins, the Son is a priest. And because the Son of God has sat down at the right hand of the Most High, he is a king. Prophet, priest, and king. This is a set of ideas that the Hebrew writer is going to develop throughout the book. That Jesus of Nazareth is God's Messiah, and that as such he is the perfect prophet, priest, and king. He is the last prophet, priest, and king that God's people need. Now, before we finish today, I want to give the last word to David McClister in his work on the book of Hebrews. And the relationship that the Hebrew writer begins from this very introduction, the relationship that he begins establishing between the old order and the new order, what we might associate with the Old Testament and the New Testament, or the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Those aren't exactly the same things, but we tend to associate all of those things. The Hebrew writer draws a relationship between old and new in those categories. And I want to finish out with letting David McClister describe that relationship. He says in his commentary on Hebrews, the author's statement in the first two verses asserts both continuity and discontinuity between the old and new revelations of God. There is continuity or unity in that it is the same God who speaks in both. His former message led to the latter one, and his latter message is properly the completion of the former one. But there is discontinuity in that the latter message was delivered through a superior agent in a once-for-all way. And we're going to see this relationship between the old order and the new order developed throughout the book. So that's going to be a major thing to watch out for. So that finishes us up for this week. Thanks for joining us in our study this week. Next week we're going to look at the Hebrew writer's first exhortation in the first couple of chapters of Hebrew. And that means we're going to be talking a lot about angels and what angels do, but most importantly, what they have already done, what they did in the old order of things. So we look forward to seeing you then. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.